of the past in this country have not even been properly sorted out. Land issues still haven't even been sorted out. White people still own so much of the land, and there are still so many things to sort out in this country. But I love this country. We are one of the most beautiful countries in the world. We have so much integrity, and we have so much promise. And we just have to believe that. And we do not need to be leveraged by absolute idiots like Donald Trump, who are being informed by the Rob Herzogs of this country and all these people that are elite, who have never given the masses of this country, the poor people of this country, the workers of this country, one thought. All they want to do is carry on, and they want the same old, which is driven by greed and luxury.
Kim, this leverage that you say we have as a country, maybe can you give us one example, whether it's an area of leverage that you think we can and should be using in this moment? How should then we be responding?
Okay, well, I can give you two. I mean, the one, which is obviously the most obvious, is our resources. We have incredible resources, and it's how we use them. And a lot of people criticize our government about how we put restrictions and regulations. We needed those because do we want to be like all other countries? And it's being so publicized at the moment that African countries are starting to now call out the exploitation of their resources that has happened for so many decades. So we have that. We also have the most incredible tourism. We also have a country of people that are resilient, who are robust, and who can handle a lot of stuff. And we just need to up our game. Definitely, we need to up our game. We need to work together as a country. But and obviously, we do have the BRICS, which is a very definite situation going forward, with China and with Russia and with all these other countries that are joining. So we have options, and we need to believe in that.
All right, Kim, out in KZN, let's leave it there. Johannesburg, Alice, you are in Johannesburg. You want to talk about something completely different. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
Yes.
Cathy, I've got a problem with Nazareth Memorial Park. My nephew's grave has been desecrated in that park. I called them in December. I spoke to a lady by the name of Nicole. Unfortunately, when I called her, I didn't have the correct grave number. I went back to her to give her the correct grave number. She didn't pick my call up. On the weekend, my friend went to the cemetery, and her son's grave was also desecrated. Cathy, my sister-in-law, is in a state as if she was told her son died yesterday. We pay such a lot of money for our loved ones to be buried there, and our graves are being desecrated. What do we do? What does Nazareth Memorial Park's proprietors going to do about it?
And Alice, from what you have seen, is it just a general state of decay of the memorial park?
No.
Or is it certain sections of it?
Vandalism. On certain graves. It's vandalism. And I'll tell you, both these boys were brutally murdered in the township. And we suspect that people are going out there and picking graves to desecrate.
So you think it's targeted, Alice?
Exactly. It is what it is. It's being targeted.
Sure. And what would be the message that that is being sent to you as families, you think?
We don't know. Firstly, these boys were practically murdered in their homes. Nobody's been arrested for it. We've accepted that because if your person gets murdered, nobody's arrested, nothing happens. We've accepted it. That's the norm. But going to this length is now actually antagonize these families.
Yeah.
They're never going to get over it.
And Alice, do you believe that there were gangs that were involved or linked to the killings of these individuals, these young men?
Yes. I'm not going to dilly-dally. It was gang-related.
Sure. All right. Look, I wonder how then, those that are in charge of the memorial park would be able to help or even intervene. What kind of help were you asking from them?
Cathy, they guarantee on their boards that goes to the park safe, safe premises. That's not safe. If they can provide us with CCTV footage as to who's doing it, that would get us to go somewhere, to do something about it.
All
but
right.
now they're ignoring us.
Alice, you've certainly given us something to think about there. Alice in Johannesburg talking about the Nasrec Memorial Park, right? Certain graves being targeted, and they're looking for answers from those that run the memorial park. But I think just more broadly, cemeteries are often very public spaces. How would one ensure the safety of safeguarding some of the property there? What responsibility would those who run the park actually have? Yeah. Alice, you've certainly given me something to think about. I wonder if the rest of the community has anything to contribute on that particular issue. Mzio in the Eastern Cape, good morning.
Hi, Cathy.
Yes.
As for the reason that Trump is putting, this is something that I was not waited for. But as for the action, we all know that what America is going to react. Not only America, but other countries that have interest in Israel. This is something that we've been waiting for. I remember you have a professor there that was looking at the same issue, that if then America reacts, and the answer for that, the professor was, our foreign policy should be informed by our interests. That was the answer for that professor. Telling me, Cathy, I totally disagree what Trump is saying, but this is something that when we are taking this action of Russia, of inviting Hamas in Lutuli House, and we portray them as a freedom fighter, what message were we putting? Didn't you anticipate that it will have a negative impact? I think we cannot just talk about the Forum. Forum is just but all these things we should consider. These are the things that have prompted the United States to act as they are acting. And we should be, the reason even why we have Rasul go to America is because of that anticipation that America is going to react. And the ANC was told that it must tone their views towards this Middle East crisis.
Okay, so Mzi, you basically are saying, well, it's been a long time coming.
Everybody knew.
Okay.
I mean, if anybody said that he caught by surprise, I don't know where he comes from. But it's as a layman person, this is something that I've been waiting for. Not for the reason that it's a lame reason that he put it. But as for the action that is taking, everybody knew that America will react.
All right, Mzi, thanks for your views. He's out in the Eastern Cape. Let's listen to what some of you are also contributing to this conversation on the WhatsApp line.
Hi, Cathy. It's Sonabe in Hermanas. Cathy, you know what I like about Donald Trump? Donald Trump, he never hid it himself. He always hate black people. And now, the new revolution that is coming from the United States of America, it's clear, we all know that Donald Trump, when he was campaigning, he made it clear that he is going to put Americans first. And now he's doing exactly that. I wish that in this country, out of this lot of political parties in South Africa, one party, particularly the black parties, so-called black parties, can we have one leader that can stand up for us?
Cathy, good morning to you and good morning to SAFM listeners. Mine is simple and straight, Cathy. I think Donald Trump must just keep America and we keep our own South Africa and let the Africans keep the Africa for themselves. Donald Trump has never visited us, even in his first presidency spell. He never came to South Africa. That tells you he doesn't care anything about Africa. So he must just keep his America, we keep our own South Africa. And he's pushing us now towards China. I think we'll have to embrace the Chinese now in this case and make trade deals with Chinese and other Asian countries. America, with Donald Trump, if you want to become great again, think twice. Thank you, Cathy.
Good morning, Cathy. But can we just really blame AfriForum? Was there no truth in the statement that, farmers, especially white farmers, were under siege at some point in our country? They were being killed. That is a fact. So what do we say about that? That also was not true? Of course, what Donald Trump has said is just ridiculous, but let's examine what AfriForum was complaining about or was concerned about. Everything.
Hashtag SAFM Talking Point.
Oh, thanks for those WhatsApp voice notes. Yeah, Ntabo, absolutely right. There have been ongoing concerns about the farm murders in the country. But if we're to look at it based off the facts and the statistics that we get out of the South African, police service, farm murders are the lowest that they have ever been. They are at a historical low. So the idea that there are these targeted killings beyond what other sections of the country face in as far as crime is concerned has been something that has been questioned. And it's one thing to talk about the crime situation overall in this country. Yes, it affects certain groupings differently, but to create an impression that there is a particular group of people that are under siege any more so or differently than the rest of South Africa is where part of the questions came in. Denzel, you're in Kimberley. Good morning. You also want to talk about this issue.
Good morning, Cathy. I hope you are well.
Yes.
Cathy, I'm really angry at this AfriForum. Let me tell you why. I've asked a question. Why do white racists want to keep on holding to this land and not be part of this equality? We can see we are suffering. I asked that question, and I'm going to answer you. Chris, from the CEO, the former CEO from Agri SA, he answered my question. He said on this SASN that ownership creates wealth. So I was really angry, and I'm still angry. Why did they keep on holding to this land? Why can't they share this land? That is my anger. First one. Then these things, Cathy, you must put it in silos that there's a link between them. Donald Trump is part of this. This thing has everything to do with BRICS. BRICS want to ditch the dollar and create their own currency. Donald Trump doesn't like it. If you put that one in one silo. Our second silo, our soldiers have been deployed many years. We didn't suffer, I stand to be corrected, we didn't suffer any casualties or fatalities. Why now? Why are this president of Rwanda so emboldened? Why is he so arrogant I'm going to answer you. This Gigame, or what he's saying is he's doing business with Donald Trump. And why does this president of the USA enter the frame? Why on us, South Africa? According to Trump, we are the weakest link in BRICS. He wants to target us so that BRICS can see the pain. This thing can actually end up in a war, Cathy. I'm really angry and I'm really scared.
Okay.
And for us, AfriForum, I don't know what the problem is. But like I've said, they said it themselves. Ownership creates wealth. The land is about wealth. So this thing, I'm scared and I'm angry, Cathy. We are heading, and it's going to spiral out of control because of the presence of Trump.
All
Very
right.
fast. If
Denzel?
you don't get a hold of this thing.
Let's leave it there for this morning. Well, one certainly hopes not, right? One certainly hope that, as Denzel is saying, that there isn't a worst-case scenario that leads to conflict or on this matter. But yes, absolutely, it does need the leaders in the room to stand up and state their positions. The South African government, what is going to be our response to what the U.S. president has said? Is the tweet on social media by the International Relations Minister, is that going to be it? Are we going to see a statement from our president? What is the work that is going to be taking place behind the scenes to also correct this narrative? I'm going to take a quick break. I'm back with more of your calls.
Fizzy drinks and fruit juices can make our children sick. Sugar is dumped into their bodies with every sip, which could lead to obesity, heart disease, and diabetes as they age. We must protect them from drinks high in sugar. Demand a stricter health promotion levy now. Sign the petition on heala.org. That's HEALA.org.
Get back to the grind with Puco, where every journey begins. We're a trusted partner who's there with you every step of the way. From sand to sandware, basins to bricks, and paint to PPE, we provide the tools and support to make your vision a reality. We believe every measured cut and carefully placed nail leads to more than a building. It's about trust, safety, and the assurance that no matter the challenges, it will all come together. Find your nearest store on puco.co.za. Begin with Puco.
Puco. Hashtag SFM Talking Point.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. It is your national roundtable. Of course, still the Talking Point. I'm taking your calls on 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial on the WhatsApp voice note line, 0614 104 107. Bonakele and Kailicha, you want to talk about something completely different. You want to talk about Panyaza Lesufi.
Absolutely. Good morning. I always talk of things different from others. I'm not a copycat, you know.
All right, Bonakele.
You see, I'm very concerned, and a statement made by Ule Sifu to say those who hate them, they must forget they're not going to leave the ANC. And I'm interested and curious to know who is he referring to? Who are those that hate them? And why is he talking like that? Can you hear me, Cathy?
I can, Bonakele. I assumed you're asking a rhetorical question. I certainly can't answer that question. Panyaza Lesufi would be able to answer that question for himself.
I'm asking, knowing fully aware you won't know, but it's quite a worrying statement to come on public and say something like that. Those who hate Lesufi and others, so they must forget. I mean, it's something that needs to be taken serious. So that means with this building of the ANC, it's something that is going to take too long. If you hear leaders of such as Olesif is speaking like that. You understand?
When I get it, do you think he's not responding to the pressure that maybe they have been under? Because remember, their position in the ANC has been not only something that is an internal matter, but there's been a lot of public conversation and debate around it. I'm sure it's not easy, tuning onto the radio, watching your TV, and all the talk is about what will your position in this party be, and subsequently, how will it have implications for your position that you occupy in government? So is this not him doing a bit of a victory dance, saying you thought you could get rid of us, but we're still here?
Okay. But, one thing for sure that I know, for people to claim that we know of leaders, such as Mohlahlana once said, his blood is green and gold. He's not going to leave the ANC. Ace Mahashule said so. Recently, it was Utate Uzuma who wants to come back to ANC. But for someone who doesn't do things correctly, he will be gone. Not unless he toe the line and do what the ANC tells them to do, the correct thing. But for him to say he's not going to leave the ANC, not unless he's going to do things correctly and in a right manner that is ANC is expected of them.
Okay.
That is my, yeah.
All right, Bonakele, let's leave it there. Chaka, you're in Bloom. Good morning.
Morning, Cathy. Cathy, the statement from Donald Trump is that he talks of certain classes being, denied land, and secondly, he talks about human rights violations. But then contradicts himself to say that, we're still going to conduct an investigation, but then we'll suspend funding. It's almost like a judge sentencing you, giving you a suspended sentence pending further investigation by the prosecution authority. That is clearly an irrational and mad statement. But I mean, it's not atypical. It's very typical of him to make such statements. And even the timing of such utterances. You remember that Benjamin Netanyahu had paid, Donald Trump a visit yesterday, I think, and then he makes these statements after the visit. Of course, now, you see this as an alliance of the right wing, or let's call it the alliance of racists and Nazis. Remember the Nazi salute given by Elon Musk, the kind of salute that is associated with the Knight Templars and the secret society.
Chaka, was it confirmed that indeed was a Nazi salute?
Well, I don't know. Maybe because he was criticized over the media, and maybe if that's the kind of salute that's associated with, he'll do it again. And of course, a lot of people will be concerned. Then he'll have to explain himself. But in any case, apart from the salute, Elon Musk had in the past, he talked about the white people being killed in South Africa, and then things to that end. He's a main advisor to Donald Trump. It's all a bunch of racists. Then of course our local racists here went to them to petition against the land expropriation.
Okay.
And in Tulasi's program this morning, Tulasi was mentioning that we should make a campaign, explain ourselves, and so on and so on. I don't think we should waste our time. I think Ronald Lamola was precise. He said, no, let's wait for he says he's going to do an investigation. Let's not even react. Let's not give him the platform. Let's downgrade what Donald Trump is saying. Just say, Ramaphosa can say, no, we understand what you're saying, but we're waiting for your investigation.
Okay.
Because it has been done without any investigation or whatever,
Sure. Chaka, let's leave it there. And Chaka raises a good point about Elon Musk, because remember, Starlink is one of the entities that has been having its own issues in terms of gaining access to the South African market. the South African, government saying that it needs to comply with local rules and regulations, and there must be some kind of commitment around South African businesses that will be involved there. And so, it's an interesting link to point out there, Chaka. JCK, you're in Mosina. Good morning.
Scotty.
JCK, the line isn't great. I can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah. So, Scotty, President Donald Trump mustn't get into our nation. I mean, South Africa, to begin with, it's a sovereign state. You understand? America mustn't tell us what to eat, what not to eat, who our friends must be. You understand? He's interfering with this land, expropriation. It's just a matter of they're not grabbing the land from the white people. The land that is not used, the properties that are not used, they must be used. Huh? I mean, I think it's time now that maybe Trump is bitter about our, what do you call that, BRICS. Maybe he's bitter about BRICS. But I think it's time now. I mean, South Africa has got everything and Africa has got everything. We can survive without America. And America, if we don't support them, they too, they will get beheaded somewhere, somehow. Let me rest my case for now.
Okay, JCK in Mosina, we'll leave it there. Is it as simplistic as that, saying we can survive without them? Can we? Really? I don't know. That will perhaps be the subject of a conversation on another day. For now, it is 10 o'clock. Time for the latest news update.
In our top stories, Parliament Committee calls for dismissal of Post Office business rescue practitioners and businesses concerned over US funding cut threat. Good morning. Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies has called for the dismissal of the business rescue practitioners who are overseeing the South African Post Office business rescue. The committee says it's frustrated by the practitioners' failure to develop a viable plan to restore the struggling entity's financial health. Kusela Diko is the Portfolio Committee's chairperson.
The Portfolio Committee has met with these business rescue practitioners a number of times last year. In our engagements with them, while we understood some of the work that they have done with the Post Office, some of the successes they've recorded specifically around managing the debt, we don't think that they have gone far enough. We are 180 million down the line a year later, but you still don't have a plan that is going to take the post office beyond its current state. The question that we've been posing both to the business rescue practitioners and the minister is that how do we ensure that the post office is returned to solvency, returned to liquidity? It's got a strategy that makes it sustainable.
The Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, Gwede Mantashe, will represent President Cyril Ramaphosa at the Investing in Africa Mining Indaba that starts in Cape Town today. The presidency says this follows a change in the president's schedule. As a result, Minister Mantashe will now lead the government delegation and deliver the keynote address on behalf of the President. The Indaba serves as a platform for stakeholders to discuss the future of the industry under the theme Future-Proofing African Mining. Since its inception in 1994, the Indaba has become a key event for mining professionals, investors and industry leaders looking at the vast opportunities in Africa's mining sector. The case against the 8 former members of Deputy President Paul Mashatile's VIP Protection Unit is expected to continue in the Randburg Magistrates Court in Johannesburg today. The officers were arrested after being caught on video allegedly assaulting civilians on the side of the N1 highway in Johannesburg in July 2023. The accused are out on 10,000 Rand bail each and have since returned to work. They face several charges including assault, malicious damage to property and pointing of a firearm. Lerato Makola reports.
The victims confirmed to be military trainees and were driving from Potchefstroom to a military base in Pretoria when they were allegedly assaulted. The first witness, who was the driver, testified last year how he was beaten up and lost consciousness and left on the side of the road. The second also described how he was dragged out of the vehicle and assaulted. Lawyer for the accused claimed the officers had to use minimum force to ensure compliance, adding that the occupants of the car were drunk and driving recklessly.
The inquest into the Highgate Hotel massacre of 1993 continues in East London today. The matter will continue with a ballistics expert and former Zainian People's Liberation Army APLA operative Tumisane Ngamazana expected to take the stand. He's expected to shed light on APLA's alleged involvement in the shooting. The killings were pinned on the former liberation movement, which denied any involvement. No one has been arrested or convicted thus far for the attack that claimed 5 lives. The inquest started last Monday and 4 witnesses have already testified. The South Africa Chamber of Commerce in the United States has expressed deep concern over the possible impact on South African business after President Donald Trump threatened to cut U.S. funding to the country. Trump posted to his Truth Social platform that South Africa was confiscating land and treating certain classes of people very badly, and that the United States would not stand for it. Sharon Bryce-Peace reports.
The Chamber says the United States obligated nearly $440 million in assistance to South Africa in 2024, supporting various healthcare and social initiatives, and that the suggestion that U.S. funding would be cut raises serious concerns for the South African business community, particularly in light of the long-standing economic and trade relationship between the two nations. The statement said that the potential revocation of AGOA benefits would significantly impact South African businesses, leading to job losses and economic instability. It further emphasized the need for diplomacy and constructive dialogue to strengthen economic ties and address concerns through appropriate channels.
Recapping the top story, Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies has called for the dismissal of the business rescue practitioners who are overseeing the South African Post Office business rescue. For SFM News, I am Anne Musa.
Outsurance has another random fact for you. In 1996, a cold drink and pie cost 5 Rand. Now it's about 44 Rand. Times have changed, but Outsurance is still committed to giving you big savings on your car insurance. SMS out to 30754. That's out to 30754. Let's hear from 47-year-old Babita, who switched to Outsurance and saves an unbelievable 599 Rand a month on her 2023 BMW X1.
Gave Outsurance a call. Everything was done really quickly, really efficiently, and that smile is not going anywhere.
SMS out to 30754. If Outsurance can't beat your car insurance premium, ask them for 500 Rand cash and make that 1,500 Rand cash if you've been claim-free and with the same insurer for 3 years. SMS out to 30754. With Outsurance, you always get something out. A licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
Fizzy drinks and fruit juices can make our children sick. Sugar is dumped into their bodies with every sip, which could lead to obesity, heart disease, and diabetes as they age. We must protect them from drinks high in sugar. Demand a stricter health promotion levy now. Sign the petition on heala.org. That's HEALA.org.
Bridget Masinga on SAFM.
You come very much from a politically conscious family. You've been politically educated from a very young age, so you were well aware. And I wonder, as a young 19-year-old, what's going on in those moments?
I was 19 at the time. My mother had died 3 years before that. And so I was very much a depressed young person dealing with the idea of being alone in the world. At the time, my family didn't understand me, and so many people in my family were not even speaking to me. When I was 19 years old, I was kind of, what's that thing where they throw you out the family?
A black sheep, a loner?
Disowned. I was kind of disowned by my family. I had no one really. I was spending every birthday alone, every Christmas alone, Easter alone.
Miss Thandiswa Mazwai.
You are listening to The Full Circle. Missed it? Find the podcast at safm.co.za.
February may be a short month, but with Outsurance, your car insurance savings could be big. Get a quote, and if Outsurance can't beat your car insurance premium, ask them for 500 Rand and make that 1,500 Rand if you've been claim free and with the same insurer for 3 years. Get monthly savings on your car insurance or cash in your pocket. Either way, you win. SMS out to 30754. That's out to 30754. Outsurance, you always get something out. A licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
SAFM supports a litter-free South Africa. Play your part in keeping our surroundings and environment clean. SAFM, leading the conversation. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
It's 9 after 10 o'clock. Welcome to the second hour of The Talking Point. Coming up in this hour, I promised a really incredible panel when it comes to unpacking the situation and the conflict unfolding in the DRC. Of course, South Africa is still in talks regarding the reparation of 14 soldiers, 14 of our soldiers that were killed in the DRC on a SADC peace mission. The M23 rather, not the MK, the M23 fighters are now also saying that they're making their way to Kinshasa. The conflict in that part of the world has also erupted in a diplomatic spat between South Africa and Rwanda. So lots being said about the conflict right now, but let's try and get the perspectives of those who either have inside knowledge or are actively involved in some of those processes. Joining me on the show today in studio is our African analyst and executive producer at Channel Africa's Kiswahili desk, Nixon Katembu. On the line is Kabasu Babu Katulondi, African politics analyst and writer. Kabasu, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good morning and warmest greetings to the listeners and to the panelists.
Professor Kula Teletsane is the director of the SADC organ on politics, defense and security affairs. Prof, good morning. Good morning, Prof.
Ma'am, my apology, I was muted. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear now. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to our listeners and my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Ambassador Welile Nhlapo, Special Envoy to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi. Ambassador Nhlapo, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to my fellow panelists who I know very well and respect. I'm happy to be part of this panel.
I want to start with maybe just the moment that we are in and get reflections from you in your own words, and given the vast experience that each of you have dealing with some of these issues, whether it's conflict on the continent, issues of diplomacy, and really trying to manage conflict. What do you make of this moment that we are in? How would you describe it? Prof, let me begin with you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's difficult to say. It's a difficult time. It's a difficult time for the DRC. It's a difficult time for the region. No one ever expected that we will be here today. It's a war that comes a long way, and of which, as you may be aware, the SADC had a meeting last week on Friday. The heads of state met in discussing this issue, and it's not the first time that we had a summit of heads of state on the DRC. We had a countless summit on the matter. But this time around, I think the situation is quite different. What do I make out of it? It's complicated, ma'am. It's really complicated. As you may know, that we have our troops who are in the DRC. We have the injured, we have the dead. That at the moment, it's a struggle to get them out. And I really feel for the families at the moment who are expecting their family, even the families who have those that are still alive, because they are uncertain as to whether tomorrow they will still be alive or not. So it's difficult for the region, it's difficult for me, difficult for the families, and for those countries that are deployed in those countries.
Ambassador Nhlapo?
Yes, first of all, let me say thank you for the invitation. Let me start by saying that we are here talking about people's lives, and we need to be very sensitive on certain observations that we make, and I'll be guided by that. That's number one. We are at the same moment we found ourselves in 1996, when we had to have Kabila and Mobutu Sese Seko on the Ontenique again to stop the advance of the forces that were on the border of Kinshasa, just about to take Kinshasa, and we managed to stop that through that intervention. So we're back there. We're back to the Lusaka movement. We have to reflect and look at that and see where is this thing taking us. But also to understand in context, what are we really talking about when we talk about the Lusaka process then, and what we would characterize is now being characterized as the Nairobi process is not new, and the Luanda process. These are initiatives that have been taken in the past, and we were part of those processes. I first went to the now Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1996 to engage Mobutu's government on the situation that had arisen in the Eastern Congo. And the difficulty we had is that even with them at the time, they had no access to that area. They had no control, they had no access. They are not new. It's something that starts a long time. Thus, Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the United Nations, died in Dola in 1961. He was trying to deal with this situation in the Congo, and the investigation into his death is still not resolved. So I'm saying we are coming way far from this thing, but we've traversed this road. Our footprints are all over there. We understand what is happening. We've engaged all the people. And I think we need to use that experience in order to avoid what is happening now.
All right. Thank you for that contribution. Kabasu, let me give you a chance to come in. And of course, you were also part of that RCD rebellion that was supported by Rwanda.
Well, thank you very much. Let me first say that we need to formulate, we need to articulate the problem also from the basis, imperative basis of how the Congolese view the issue. We're talking here about the Congolese state's deterioration, like a constitutional, institutional, and functional deterioration internally, which has rendered the country vulnerable to all these pathologies that we are witnessing right now. All right? Let's be clear. South Africa spent a lot of money, like the other panelists had just indicated, spent a lot of money under President Mbeki at the Congolese Dialogue, Sun City, Pretoria, etc. So the Congolese had what they called the Sun City Pact, started rebuilding the country. All right? So Mr. Tshisekedi has prompted a regression of the country in terms of creating a crisis of legitimacy, even a crisis of distribution, which has weakened the state. He has destroyed national cohesion. Quickly, M23 was defeated. There was no talk of M23 no more in the country. Was defeated by under President Kabila in 2012, 2013. Before even becoming president, Mr. Tshisekedi was plotting against Mr. Kabila. He associated actually with M23, not in Rwanda, but in the M23 segment in Uganda, to actually materialize a plot to topple Kabila. And then when Mr. Tshisekedi became president, he is the one who reactivated. It's a self-inflicted wound. He reactivated M23, brought them to Kinshasa for 14 months, and there was a disagreement. M23 went back with the money and weapons that Mr. Tshisekedi gave him. And specifically with regard to South Africa and SADC, we are supposed to operate through the prism paradigm of African Renaissance Ubuntu. SADC has got charters. SADC didn't proactively intervene to say there's a crisis of legitimacy here, there's a problem with elections, there's a problem with political stability. How do we solve this to preclude, amplification of instability in the East? SADC didn't do anything. So South Africa sends troops, and they find themselves being associated, unfortunately, with the National Army of the Congo, which is working with genocidal forces and a lot of mercenaries, the utilization of mercenaries in Africa being prohibited by AU. So it is a self-inflicted wound by Mr. Tshisekedi himself. SADC and South Africa should have been proactive. Instead of sending troops, they should have anticipated and get all the stakeholders to work together to solve the problem internally, because the real quintessential problem is internal. Rwanda and others are peripheral.
All right, Kabasu, thanks for that view. Nixon, let me give you a chance to come in.
I think we're turning around the circle and not naming the problem what it is. And I like Ambassador Velile and Professor who have named. And Kabasu point the critical point in terms of internal dynamics within the political culture within the DRC. Those are given. But for the current M23 problems, it's clear. Indeed, there are aspects of self-inflicting wound in terms of the Nairobi and the Addis Ababa process with the negotiation that was done with the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region, ICGLR, which made clear that the M23 should form a political party. They should be integrated into the National Army, but those who had committed crime and who have been fingered by the United Nations, they should not be integrated. What happened then on the 11th of July 2019 until the 12th, a meeting took place in Kigali to discuss on how these people are going to go back to the Congo with the current government. They spent 14 months in Kinshasa ironing out. But in the meantime, Kigali and Kampala were rearming them. So to say that this is just a self-inflicted wound, I think that there is a distortion of facts here, because there has been an active process of engaging the M23 to form a political party. Now, notwithstanding the mass evidence that UN group of expert reports have produced in who is funding them, who is rearming them. And if we are not dealing with these issues, then look retrospectively where we've come from, as Ambassador Velile talked about. Who is the problem here? Why is the problem persisting? And what are the nature of the dynamics that are holding the problem to persist? Is no other than Rwanda's support, Uganda's support, the dynamics around the mineral conflict in the DRC, notwithstanding the claim, the political claim that M23 is bringing in. Now, particularly, I'm saying this because there have been resolution to what Ambassador Velile talked about, Lusaka, Pretoria, Sun City, in which resulted some of these crucial leaders who claim marginalization. One took the vice presidency of the DRC, the other one was a part of the deputy speaker of the Chamber of Parliament. Many other officers, Banyamulenge, because that's what the narrative in Kigali is saying. There are about 1,857 high-ranking officers in the Congolese National Army who are Banyamulenge, who are occupying a critical position, including General Masunzu, who have just been appointed on the 3rd zone of the military district in Kisangani, fighting the M23. So as long as we don't name the problem, and the problem here, the instrumentalization of ethnicity to fight economic wars on DRC territory, and the massive displacement that are occurring in pushing the people out of their land and killing millions, I think we're doing a disservice to these discussions.
Professor Telitsane, let me give you a chance to come in, because I know you're also going to have to leave this conversation a little bit early. Given what Nixon has just ended off with, right, the instrumentalization of these ethnic tensions for the economic benefit of largely external players, to what extent then has the SADC process confronted that head on? Because if I go back to your opening remarks, you talk about countless summits that have been held. You talk about a very complicated situation that we're in. But all of it gives the perception of being overwhelmed, right? That we're in this situation and we've been in it for some time, and quite frankly, there doesn't seem to be any clear way of coming out of it.
Cathy, thank you so much. And I think if you permit me before I carry on, I think given the current challenges that we are facing in the DRC, I don't think I spoke to the African Union in the meeting last week, where there was a minister from Rwanda and a minister from DRC attacking each other. And I said, and even to our panelists here, I think DRC is in a crisis at the moment. And for us to be pointing fingers is not going to help us. What needs to happen now is for us to come together, the think tanks, academics, political leaders, to find a solution for the DRC, not to pointing fingers on who is wrong. The house is burning. The issue is not to find who started the fire, but to extinguish the fire. Ma'am, coming back to your question.
Just before you go on, has the house not been burning for a long time now? Has the house not been burning dating back to 1996? So at this point, we have to be finding out why this house remains on fire. Despite the fire extinguishers, despite the interventions, why is this house still on fire?
I hear you. The point I'm making here is that pointing fingers at each other is not going to solve the problem. Like the heads of state mentioned last week, Friday, what needs to happen here is that we need to engage all parties to the conflict. And I think I like the speaker that have just spoken. There are so many parties to this conflict. Some of them we know them. Some of them are unknown, are hidden, that we don't even know who they are, but they are there. It's a complicated war. It involves so many role players, both in and outside the region, outside the continent. So it's so difficult to deal with this conflict. And hence the summit made the decision that in order for this to be dealt with, we really need to involve all those parties to the conflict, both state and non-state parties, to be part of the conversation in going forward. Because now it is worrying at the moment when M23 is now talking about going to Kinshasa. It is a worrying factor, and they are going to capture quite a number of towns as we speak. They are moving on, and they are determined. It looks like they are very determined at the moment to capture those towns. So for me, it is important to intensify the Luanda process. And I know one will argue that, but the Luanda process has been there, the Nairobi process has been there. But I think it is time now to reinforce all those two processes and move forward in getting the solution to the problem. And I agree with you, ma'am. The house has been on fire for too long, and we need to find a solution, but not to blame each other.
The difficulty, of course, is that SADC could soon find itself in a position where there's all of this planning and talking and organizing that takes place, but that ultimately has no real effect on the conflict, as we have seen. Outside of the fact that, yes, we're part of the peacekeeping mission, we're losing lives. There are resources from different countries that are continually being deployed to that particular part of the continent. So the question really is, yes, we're in this moment. It could well feel that it's different, but also very much have echoes of the past. But what is tangible right now that is being done differently right now that we can say this could well yield different results to what we've experienced before?
Cathy, what you need to understand is that at the end of the day, you can bring the best negotiators. The key player in this negotiation, the key player in solving the problem, it is the government of the DRC. And they are a sovereign state. Unfortunately, you cannot force them on certain things, and I will not mention them. You can't force them on certain things that they do not agree with. Even though you are a key negotiator and you see, if you don't involve 1, 2, 3, we will not move with our negotiations. It remains at the end of the day the decision of the government of the DRC. So for me, what is different now that you are talking about is for the SADC to say, we will engage the government of DRC, we will enforce the government of the DRC on certain terms and conditions going forward in the negotiation.
All right. Prof, thank you so much for your contribution. I know you've got to go. Professor Kula Deletsane, who is Director of the SADC Organ on Politics, Defense and Security Affairs. You heard what it says. Ultimately comes down to the DRC as a sovereign state. What is it that they're willing to give the go-ahead, and what is it that they simply do not agree to that has an implication on this ongoing conflict? We'll continue to hear the reflections of our other panelists, Ambassador Willile Nhlapo, Special Envoy, former Special Envoy, I should say, to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi, and Kabasu Babu Katulondi, Africa Politics Analyst, and Nixon Katembu. For now, it's 10:30, time for your latest news headlines.
Good morning. In the headlines, Gauteng Education MEC Matome Chilwane says he is deeply shocked and saddened by the tragic death of a grade 12 learner from Krugersdorp High School west of Johannesburg. The learner died in a freak sporting accident that happened during a cricket match at the Christian Brothers College in Boksburg on Saturday. Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies has called for the dismissal of the business rescue practitioners who are overseeing the South African Post Office business rescue. And US President Donald Trump says US tariffs on imports from the European Union will definitely happen following similar moves targeting Canada, Mexico and China. I'll have details on these and other stories at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand currently trading at 18 Rand 97 to the dollar, 23 Rand 30 to the pound and 19 Rand 38 to the euro. Markets in Asia extended losses at the closing bell. The JSE is weaker in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are trading lower. Gold is trading at $2,788, platinum $957 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $76.53 a barrel.
We've upgraded. Our new GIS-linked national address database lets us connect with you better than ever before. By visualizing licensed and unlicensed households nationwide, we can ensure timely communication. Our payment reminders are a crucial tool to help you stay compliant and avoid penalties, empowering you to take proactive steps. Efficient electronic communication helps us collect fees seamlessly, bolstering the SABC's mandate in line with Section 27 of the Broadcasting Act. TV licenses. Pay yours, make a difference.
Mom, yeah? Look, a golden pencil.
Wow, where'd you get that?
My Buco pencil case.
Oh.
I could win a bike and vouchers, and my school gets 20,000 Rand.
Oh. That's so cool. The Buco Golden Pencil Initiative. 9 lucky learners will find a golden pencil in their Buco pencil cases, winning big prizes and school refurbishments. Buco, building communities one golden moment at a time. Begin with Buco.
Buco. Santam can cover your car in just 2 minutes. That's faster than sticking to your New Year's resolution to eat healthy, then immediately reaching for the leftover pizza in the fridge and deciding it's a reward for surviving day one. Get your car covered in just 2 minutes so you can live in the moment, not in the worry. Visit santam.co.za. Santam, this is freedom. Santam is an authorized FSP, a licensed non-life insurer and controlling company for its group companies.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on The Talking Point. We are unpacking the conflict in the DRC through the not sure what happened there. Apologies. Through the lens of our panelists, really a panel that is full of people engaged in the process who understand that region and some of its complexities very, very well. Prof has left us. Professor Teletsane has had to leave, but Ambassador Willie Lentlap was still on the line alongside Kabasu Babu Katulondi, who's an African politics analyst, and Nixon Katembo, who is in studio with me. You'd know him from our Kiswahili desk at Channel Africa. Ambassador Nhlapo, I was listening to what part of Professor Kula had to say, right, in terms of what are we doing differently? How are we going to ensure that this is not yet another process in vain? Nixon says the elephant in the room is not being called out for what it is. And it's not necessarily a lack of knowledge of who is driving the conflict in the DRC, but rather that there isn't really an appetite to confront that head on. I want to know from you, are there lessons that we need to have learned in the last 30 years that perhaps we just are not learning, and approaches that we need to change, that we're not changing, to ensure that this conflict does come to an end? Because it's one thing to speak about an end, it's another to intentionally, actively be involved in the process of achieving that peaceful end.
Yes, no, thank you very much. I think you are driving us in the right direction. Let's start by looking at what Professor Teletsane said about where is the center of the problem. But we also have to take into cognizance the fact that since 1960, after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, there was a vacuum of governance. Even Mobutu Sese Seko, when he came in throughout, there was a drought, a desert in terms of governance. Everybody was doing whatever they like. Sun City was trying to address some of those issues to see whether we can be able to bring about institutions on the ground which will make a reality of the transition from Zaire to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in terms of building credible institutions that can lead the way out. And we've learned from the Lusaka process because we were there. And we understood the problem. And that's why all of these issues were navigated even at Sun City, including the question of the nationality of the Congolese in the Eastern Congo, who are described in so many ways. Is there's a decision, but the parliament has never really seriously came up with a law that recognizes all Congolese as citizens. That's part of the problem that we learned, and it was addressed. And we've been engaged with the UN. When MONUC was formed, it was as a result of a call from the Lusaka agreement for the UN to really take an active part in addressing the problem. Because what you have had as the UN on the ground, rightly so, we have humanitarian agencies. The humanitarian agencies, and they're not up to the task. So the UN was represented in Lusaka, and they were giving us their own take as to what the challenges are. We ourselves in South Africa, we went to engage Kofi Annan in New York when he was still head of the TPKO to try and understand what exactly is the UN doing. We also had to engage the Defense Force of Tanzania, their military headquarters, to try to have an understanding as to what exactly is happening there on the ground. And that's why we went there. At some point, we even went right up to Kisenyi, but we couldn't move across into Goma because there was recently around that time an eruption of the volcano there, so it was not possible to move. But I know the topography, I could see what was happening because we had to have a clear understanding of the lay of the ground so that our political information and political decisions can be informed by a broader understanding of the dynamics that are taking place. When I chaired the Kimberley process in 2013, one of the issues that I had to deal with was exactly what is happening in the DRC amongst other countries in the region and in the continent in terms of the illegal exploitation of resources, but we're focusing particularly on diamond, but there was a relationship between all the illegal operators who are there and the multiple militias that are mining in the Eastern Congo. They are there, they are armed, and they've got a market. They've got a market. Now, just recently, the United Nations, the United States, the new secretary in the U.S. issued a long statement on the support they had been given to Kigali since after the genocide. There's a way of apologizing because they did nothing. Because after Clinton had gone there, the same with the British. Kershaw was one of the people who was doing that. Now they've got an agreement with Rwanda on the issue of supply of critical minerals. Where do those critical minerals come from? 2 years ago, they had that agreement. It's in place. That's what the British have been doing. So they can't pretend that they don't know what is happening on the ground. They know very well.
So,
there are planes that are living in Tebe every day to unfair.
So then,
diamonds, where do they come from? So I'm saying there are multi-layers that we have to look at and look at the current initiatives and see where the gaps and opportunities are and begin to work objectively on that basis. But to also address the multiple affiliation of the government of the DRC to the many regional bodies that exist and calling upon them to do the same thing. And if they are not happy, kick them out like the East African community. When out of desperation or what, we don't know. We can't put any judgment. But those are the issues that we have to look at. That is the objective reality that is facing us.
How then should that be informing our response as South Africa? Because you have so many elements that are out of our control, and very clearly our contribution in as far as whatever peacekeeping mission we're part of there is marginal when looked at in the context of what it is that those who are part of the force are up against in that region. Is it still a worthwhile fight for us to be part of?
Cathy, I was a peacekeeper myself. I was head of the political section of the AU mission in Burundi. And when we had the agreement in Arusha, in which I was actively involved since 1996 with Molimo Nyerere and Madiba afterwards. And also my involvement at the United Nations when I was seconded to the political department of the United Nations. These are some of the areas that I dealt with. I know from practical experience the constraints on the ground, and I know what happens in the UN, in the Security Council, because the Security Council Secretariat was reporting to the very Department of Political Affairs, and that area, including other conflicts, I was responsible for. So I have an understanding. I know where the gaps are, and many of us know that. I was listening very carefully to General Mkweli, who I worked with in Burundi. He was the first commander when I was deputy head of the political mission. And when I worked with the United Nations after integration, and what he was saying was true. I listened to Kayumba Nyamwasa, who I knew and I know very well. We engaged him in the past with discussing all of these issues at the diplomatic level and other levels when I was still in Burundi, trying to have a better understanding from all sides as to what is happening. So I was listening carefully to what you were saying, because we are afforded the opportunity also to sit in an interview and engage the people that were defected and those that were caught, and came to a camp, rehabilitation camp in Rwanda, from the FFAR and Interahamwe before the FDLR, to understand why they were involved in this thing, what was happening. So I'm saying we do have that first-hand knowledge of directly talking to the people who were involved. Over the weekend, I was talking to people who in the RCD Goma said, is this the same pattern that was seen from your own experience in terms of what happened when you marched to peace up? They said yes.
So, Ambassador, I still come back to my question. How should we be then reflecting on our own role? Should we still be actively involved? Should we still be part of the SADC mission? Especially if everything that you have said, I think the one thing that has been clear, at least up to this point of the conversation, is that there is not going to be any kind of retrieve or peaceful solution for the DRC, at least not in the immediate term.
No, there is the Luanda process, which is essentially an ICGLR that authorized that mission. We have been part of the ICGLR from the very beginning, from its formation. We are not from that region. We are part of it. We continue to participate in the ICGLR. So we understand where the ICGLR comes from. That's why I'm talking about this multiple affiliation and the problems that sometimes
so basically, Ambassador,
so
you say we must stay
what
with
I'm saying in the end to your question. No, I'm just trying to lay the basis for my answer so that we don't go back. I give the other panelists a chance because I think they also have some better knowledge in some sectors than me. I am saying what we should do then as South Africa. Follow the decisions that were taken by the East African community and the SADC summit in terms of the processes that need to be revived, including the Luanda process, because there was an agreement. Angola was monitoring that agreement. But from December 5, when the two leaders failed to meet, then that agreement was in the verge of collapsing. This new situation erupted.
All right.
So we have to go back there because there was a basis.
Okay.
And there seems to be a will to do that. The diplomatic channel still exists.
Kabasu, let me give you a chance to come in. I'm sure there's a lot that you also want to put on the table. And again, I'd also implore you to weigh in on this issue of how then countries in the region, South Africa, SADC, should be looking at their continued engagement, involvement in the conflict, and to what end?
Well, I think primarily the way the multilateral engagement by East African countries, because do not forget that, first of all, when the situation started deteriorating in the Eastern DRC, Mr. Tshisekedi went to consult with EAC leaders, President Ruto, President Museveni, to help. And there was before South Africa intervened, the EAC contingent intervened, and there was a disagreement. Unfortunately, SADC didn't have the lucidity, the diplomatic sagacity to interact with EAC to know why EAC pulled out of the DRC. So it is not currently, there is no rationale, military or political or whatever, for SADC to be, SADC or South Africa to be there. Do not forget that South Africa, this is the first time, South Africa lost 13 or 18 soldiers in the Central African Republic, also owing to a misunderstanding of the internal political dynamics that were occurring over there. And I would like to differ with this sort of analytical misconception consisting of pointing out Rwanda. I'm not here defending Rwanda. I'm not here on behalf of Rwanda. Or pointing out Rwanda as the cause, as the main cause. That is analytically flawed. Why? Because Rwanda is only a symptom. Rwanda is symptomatic of the DRC state's deterioration constitutionally, institutionally, and functionally. Rwanda is among the symptoms because this insecurity is not only in North Kivu. We have got like 120 different armed groups that are wreaking havoc in the Congo, including the Mabondo, who are next a few kilometers from Kinshasa. That's where South Africa could go and intervene. Now, do not forget that today we should reconceptualize, in fact, the issue. M23 is now operating as an armed wing of a political organization called Alliance Fleuve Congo. So I'm a little bit not at ease when people tend to emphasize on M23. The situation has evolved politically in terms of how you grasp it. Alliance Fleuve Congo has got a point when they say they are a constitutional revolution armed opposition because there's no possibility of a constitutional, institutional, neutral resolution of the problem in the Congo since there is an authoritarian drift, some people say totalitarian drift in the Congo, with regimes that are considered as illegitimate, including the president, because they stem from blatant electoral fraud, I would say electoral criminality. And AFC, Alliance Fleuve Congo, which is the political umbrella above M23, because people tend to emphasize M23. So AFC says that Mr. Tshisekedi's second tenure is fraudulent based on electoral fraud. 13,000 voting machines were distributed to Mr. Tshisekedi's cronies and ballot papers. So the issue is in Kinshasa. The epicentral cause is in Kinshasa. If you sort out the issue politically in terms of saying, how can Mr. Tshisekedi sit down with all stakeholders, including IFC, Alliance Fleuve Congo, Mr. Kabila, Mr. Moise Katumbi. Remember that Mr. Katumbi, presidential candidate, is now in exile. Mr. Kabila is in exile. Key figures of Congolese politics who helped Tshisekedi ascend at the helm of the Congo state are in exile because of the totalitarian drift. The question now is, how did SADC, unit of security politics, act or anticipate or how did they show proactivity in terms of addressing that issue of authoritarian drift in the DRC? Because it is this authoritarian drift or totalitarian drift that caused one of the symptoms, which is M23. And remember, when I was saying self-inflicted, it's true, because Mr. Tshisekedi, Mr. Kabila had arrested some of the generals who are now in M23. Mr. Kabila had arrested them, jailed them in Katanga, in Kinshasa, and there was even a prosecution against some of the leaders of the M23. Guess who canceled the prosecution? Mr. Tshisekedi. Guess who freed those generals who are now leading the war there? Mr. Tshisekedi. So, and it's part of these symptoms of the totalitarian or authoritarian drift that SADC must address in terms of saying, how do you rebuild national cohesion?
Okay.
How do you rebuild national unity? And the last point...
yes, Kabasu, very briefly,
the
please.
The last point being, very quickly, that of the resolutions or the processes underway already. Mr. Tshisekedi refuses to talk to M23, yet the Luanda process, the Nairobi process entail discussing with M23, who were Mr. Tshisekedi's associates.
Okay. Thanks for that, Kabasu. Quite a mouthful there, and of course also perhaps taking us down a realm that this particular conversation may not necessarily be about. Nixon, let me bring you into studio. So Kabasu says that there is no rationale for SADC to be involved in the DRC as things stand.
Militarily, at least.
Yes, they should pack their bags and leave. I want to then talk about everything that we have heard in the last hour.
I want to point out the dishonesty in which somehow we, in some aspect, we engage in the discussions without pointing out what are the problems. And we attack peripherally certain issues. Now, SADC, to Kababsu's admission, defeated the M23 with the FRDC, Congolese army. Why? Why is it now that SADC cannot be involved? With the same problem, with the same argument. 2, the lack of articulation of interest of various aspects within the conflict in the DRC and the broader extent of the historical context of the Great Lakes region. I can go back from 1980, but I don't want to go back there for the purpose of these discussions. Now, given that, what are the problems? Who is the problem child here? And what are the issues? Dear one, and I'm not in Kagame is a problem in the region. The second problem for the region is the DRC political elite, for lack of a political culture and a direction for the institutional framework and the building of the institution of the state to defend that country and to look after the interest both politically, economically, and socially in that country. This is what is leading to everyone else seeing the DRC as an elephant which has died. Every villager have to come in and loot what they need to take. The third problem is now the problem that go beyond the DRC in terms of the geopolitical nature of the historical narrative when it comes to pertaining to the politics of the DRC. Ambassador Velile pointed out outrightly, although he talks in diplomatic terms, some of us, we can say what we want, but that's the point. So as long as we're still turning around the circle and not looking at the issue as they are, and now after pointing this, what are the critical solutions that you need to look at? One, we need to look at reforming the political culture within the DRC in building strong institutions that are responsive to the need of the Congolese people, but also building a state that is capacitated. And this is what SADC was trying to do with all the Sun City, the Lusaka, and the Pretoria 1, Pretoria 2. But unfortunately, the political elite in the DRC, I think somehow SADC dropped the ball in the process. And now we are back here where we are. For Kagame and his Memphis, you heard of General Kayumba Nyamwasa and the interview he did. What is it that no one is talking about pushing Kagame to talk to his own political problems? Because the argument he's doing, he's saying that the DRC is assisting genocide there. The DRC is saying that you assisting the M23. Why is it that the onus is only on the DRC alone to talk to these people, but they are not pushing Kagame to talk to his own internal political dynamics? Now you see the dishonesty I'm pointing out there. So the second aspect is look at now, after talking all these, have a global reach within the Great Lakes, even in Uganda, by the way. Because you have the ADF, the fight of the ADF being fought on the Congolese territory rather than being fought in Uganda. What does this say about the security of the DRC and the people living in that region? And now you have reports, economic reports showing that these countries are actually depending on the looting of resources of the DRC, and yet we are here not talking about it. So when we discuss the issue of the DRC, I believe we need to look at all these aspects. And what is going to bring peace is to allow the reconfiguration of the state in the DRC, to build the strongest institution in the DRC, to allow Rwanda also to have its own political moment in discussing the internal dynamics of Rwanda in the current state, and also Uganda as well to be brought in. Now, you see the same problem emerging. We might talk to push the M23 to discuss with the DRC, but Burundi just said just recently, the president, Evariste Ndayishimiye, pointing at Kagame that they are ready for war. What does that tell you? Ambassador Velil and the diplomatic circles that they worked with, it take them back to where they were in 1996, because they have not addressed the problems and pointing them out rightly, that if Kagame is creating havoc in Eastern Congo, why can't they address him? If the DRC is failing to build institutions, what are the support mechanisms that have put in place? I saw how the Electoral Commission here, led by then Dr. Brigadier Bam, with Terry Salan and others participating in the building of the Electoral Commission in the DRC. How far does this have gone in making sure that the state is capacitated? But also the onus is on the people of the DRC themselves. If you have people who cannot conceptualize their own country in terms of making sure that patriotism and the building of their state comes first, and we are here throwing stone at each other, particularly with the DRC, I don't see an end in sight to the conflict. And by the way, it might be the M23 today, tomorrow it will be Burundi, the other day it will be another problem, and we'll come back here in this studio to take on the same problem.
All right. That's where we're going to leave it with this particular conversation for the hour. I trust it has been enlightening, informative, if nothing else. Let me extend a deep appreciation to all of our guests that have come in to weigh in on this matter. It's time for your latest 11 o'clock news update.
In our top stories, President Ramaphosa responds to his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump, and Parliament Committee calls for dismissal of post office business rescue practitioners. Good morning. President Cyril Ramaphosa has responded to his U.S. counterpart, President Donald Trump. Trump has gone to social media accusing South Africa of confiscating land from certain people and threatened that the U.S. will cut off all future funding for Pretoria. President Ramaphosa says South Africa is a constitutional democracy that is rooted in the rule of law, justice and equality. The president says the South African government has not confiscated any land. Kailihle Kumalo has more.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says he looks forward to engaging with the U.S. President Donald Trump over the land reform policy and issues of bilateral interest. Ramaphosa says the recently adopted Expropriation Act is not a confiscation instrument, but it will ensure public access to land in an equitable and just manner guided by the Constitution. Ramaphosa says the U.S. remains a key strategic political and trade partner for Pretoria, with the exception of PEPFAR aid, which constitutes 17% of South Africa's HIV/AIDS program. There is no other funding that's received by South Africa from the U.S.
Meanwhile, Trump says U.S. tariffs on imports from the European Union will definitely happen, following similar moves targeting Canada, Mexico and China. Trump told journalists that the levies would materialize soon and accused the EU of taking advantage of the U.S.
They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing. And we take everything from them, millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm product. The European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
Gauteng Education MEC Matome Chilwane says he is deeply shocked and saddened by the tragic death of a grade 12 learner from Krugersdorp High School west of Johannesburg. The learner died in a freak sporting accident that happened during a cricket match at the Christian Brothers College in Boksburg on Saturday. It's reported that Krugersdorp High School players collided as they attempted to intercept a ball. One of the learners lost consciousness while the second experienced breathing difficulties. Emergency services personnel were called and one of the learners succumbed to his injuries in hospital. Gauteng Education spokesperson Steve Mabona has conveyed the MEC's condolences.
The department has dispatched the psycho-support team to provide necessary counseling to learners, educators, and all those that are affected by this tragic incident. The department will engage both schools to assess safety protocols surrounding the school sporting activities.
Parents whose children are waiting for school placement in Bulukwane and Limpopo say they feel neglected by the Education Department. Over 200 parents and learners are gathered outside the Education Department as the learners are yet to be admitted to school. The Education Department is yet to comment. Learners Placement Task Team member Shimerani Mohale says parents are concerned that the children are missing out on learning time.
We are not happy. There's no parent who would be happy, more especially this time of the year where a child is sitting or staying at home without education. Whereas it's each and every child's right to be educated. We are not happy. That is why we are here today. We started this marathon on Friday where we were at school. Some of the schools that we were placed on, the school on its own, it's ill-treating us, is giving us ill treatment. So they told us that they can't admit our kids unless the department furnish them with the resources.
Mpumalanga police have launched a manhunt for suspects who allegedly shot 3 patrons at a local tavern in Zulishana and Pinar in the early hours of yesterday morning. It's alleged the men arrived at the tavern just after midnight and attempted to commit a business robbery. Provincial Police spokesperson Jabu Ndubane says the suspects were on their way out when they allegedly shot randomly outside the premises of the tavern. She says 3 people sustained gunshot wounds and were rushed to hospital. Ndubane says it's not clear whether the suspects stole some items during the robbery. However, investigations are underway. And finally, Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies has called for the dismissal of the business rescue practitioners who are overseeing the South African Post Office business rescue. The committee says it's frustrated by the practitioners' failure to develop a viable plan to restore the struggling entity's financial health. Kusela Deko is the Portfolio Committee's chairperson.
The Portfolio Committee has met with these business rescue practitioners a number of times last year. In our engagements with them, while we understood some of the work that they have done with the Post Office, some of the successes they've recorded specifically around managing the debt, we don't think that they have gone far enough. We are 180 million down the line a year later, but you still don't have a plan that is going to take the post office beyond its current state. The question that we've been posing both to the business rescue practitioners and the minister is that how do we ensure that the post office is returned to solvency, returned to liquidity? It's got a strategy that makes it sustainable.
Recapping the top story, President Cyril Ramaphosa has responded to his U.S. counterpart, President Donald Trump. Trump has gone to social media accusing South Africa of confiscating land from certain people and threatened that the U.S. will cut off all future funding for Pretoria. For SAFM News, I am Anne Musa.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide. Leading the conversation.
Ever since Uspillion won 5,000 rand, 5 tower on Wheel of Fortune, he only wears white push-in sandals, star white, Baba, and he owns 10 identical pairs. And before he did not even know the Queen's language. Now, Kalabo, wow. Chance, let's watch Wheel of Fortune weekdays, Monday to Friday at 7:30 on S3 and see how one spin changed Billion's life and how it can change ours as well in just one day.
Our story is a South African story.
Anchored in the belief that it takes all of us to build a country that thrives.
To educate our children for a brighter future. To care for our health and well-being.
To nurture our environment to sustain future generations. And to transform and build a stronger nation.
When no one is left behind. Inspiring each other to succeed. Anglo-American.
Action is getting tougher in the second half of the league. The Folks want to ease off pressure with a win, but the Eagles aim to fly with 3 points to remain in the top 5. This is the Bundesliga, football as it's meant to be. Catch Borussia Mönchengladbach FC versus Eintracht Frankfurt FC on Saturday, 8 February at 7:30 p.m. live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available everywhere, for everyone, always on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Good morning, Sister Cathy. This weekend I took time to just try to understand this whole Congo story, what's happening there. And you know, because the media really it only gives you one side of the story. Congo is under attack, these rebels are bad, they are being funded by Rwanda. But when you look at what's really happening there, on if you look at the other side, what they are saying, the M23 rebels, you start understanding that there is more to the story. Because these rebels are saying that, well, I would say so-called rebels. I don't consider them rebels. I think they are people who are being mistreated by the government. And, you know, they are left with no choice but to fight and fight for their place in the country, which they are being denied.
Morning, Cathy. Apologies. I wish to ask, was the president of Rwanda, Mr. Paul Kagame, incorrect in his explanation of the cause of the conflict last week? And if so, what exactly is the truth? I understood him to say the people who are fighting in this M23 are Congolese who are isolated by the government of DRC and identified as Rwandans, yet they are not Rwandans. Please, as someone who knows the actual truth of the real cause of the conflict, can they come to the radio and tell us the truth? We really, really want the truth. We can't afford to be losing soldiers on an environment like this. We feel as South Africans, we don't know exactly what our soldiers are fighting for. Thank you.
Good morning, Sisi Cathy and the listeners at SAFM. It's Mike here in Cape Town. Sisi Cathy, I just want to get through also on your conversation with the people there. You see, the root cause of the wars in DRC, people must also focus on that. Who are causing this? These people are getting funded. There is funding here, which is making all this chaos. But people are going to sit down and try to find out solutions. You can't solve this as long there is funding, with those people who are benefiting in DRC. Thank you.
Good morning, Sis Cathy and the SFM listeners. It's Sonti here in the Eastern Cape. I think one of the major things that we need not to forget is the fact that if we are to look at the program itself of the African leaders, last year, the African leaders started last year very well, and I think they ended 2023 well as well. And I think some of these now brewing, conflicts are to destabilize all those activities that the continent leaders have been engaging on. If you now bring in, the new three from West Africa, like your Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger leaders into this conversation, it's going to be a totally new and, better expression by our leaders when it comes to positioning and putting the African continent first and not appearing as beggars. And I think this conflict is trying to destabilize that and again divide the continent.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're listening to The Talking Point. We continue the conversation on the show this morning. For the final hour, we are unpacking the Expropriation Act that was recently signed by the President. And yes, although it has been signed, what we know is that it has not yet been promulgated. And so there isn't the clarity around when exactly all of the various provisions of this particular act then will come into effect. The purpose of this conversation is to unpack what the act says about expropriation, what it also says about expropriation with nil compensation, and then also get some clarity around how it has fundamentally or will change the way in which matters of expropriation are dealt with in the country. Joining me for this conversation is Benedict Phiri, who is the Managing Director of IS Prudentia Specialist Council. Benedict, good morning to you. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to the listeners.
Professor Ruth Hall is the Acting Director of PLUS and DSI NRF South African Research Chair in Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies. Professor Hall, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
And Mpho Raboyane is the Executive Director of Ndifuno Kwazi. Mpho, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy.
Benedict, let's just begin then with the basics, right? This particular piece of legislation has been on the President's desk. He's finally signed it. It was through a very long process that I believe many South Africans were also party to. We saw the back and forth around how this ended up in Parliament and also how it evolved in shape and nature while in Parliament to end up on the President's desk to now become an act in its current structure. So let's look at then how has the approach around the expropriation of land fundamentally been changed by this particular act? So what does this act change?
Okay, thank you, Cathy. I think, and it's great that you've articulated the history of the passage of the legislation and the interactions that the various stakeholders have had with the legislation. I think it's also important to indicate that, expropriation as a concept has always been there, and it's there practically in most countries in the world because it is required for a government to be able to expropriate land to give effect to its own purposes or its government program, right? And in this particular instance, what has changed between this Act of 2014 and the previous Act of 1975, the fundamental distinctions are really that now expropriation may be done for a public interest and for a public purpose. And then what we now have in Section 3 of the Act is a new concept of compensation, which is no longer based on the willing seller and willing buyer, but based on considerations of justice and equity. So that is really, the two fundamental areas which are the stark, which create the stark differences from the previous expropriation dispensation to this one under the 2024 Act.
Prof. Hall, I'm going to ask you to stay with the same question and your own reading of the Act and what it changes going forward.
Thanks, Cathy. Yes, so building on what Benedict has said, there are two ways in which our expropriation law that we've had from the apartheid era contradicts our constitution. And so this new law brings us in line with what was already agreed in the 1990s, which is that the state may expropriate, as governments do around the world, in fact. The state may expropriate property, take it compulsorily, through a legal process, but it may do so not only for public infrastructure. And that's the difference between public purposes, like roads and dams and clinics and so on, versus in the public interest. Now, the Constitution in 1996 had a property clause that didn't say that private owners have unfettered rights. It said that the state may expropriate and that it may do so in the public interest. And that public interest includes our nation's interest to deal with land injustice. And so the new Act says that the state may expropriate not only for these public purposes, but also in the public interest, for instance, to restore land to communities who were dispossessed and who have claimed it back. So the state may expropriate not only for the state to be the owner of the land, but to return land to the dispossessed and to redistribute land to create greater justice. So that is the one thing. The one slight difference I'd have with Benedict is that our Expropriation Act never said willing buyer, willing seller. Well, he didn't say that, but just to be clear, the willing buyer, willing seller has always been the government's choice to not use its expropriation powers and to choose to pay market prices, which means that any land reform process is very slow. So the other difference now that we have with this new Act is that, it brings it in line with the Constitution. It says we do not have to pay market value. We must pay what is just and equitable on a case-by-case basis, which means that, for instance, if there is a big building that is now derelict in the city of Johannesburg, the owner has absconded, they owe millions in past rates to the city, the state should not be paying compensation to that owner. We shouldn't be imputing a market value. The state should, in the public interest, take the properties and redistribute. So it does open up a very important area of debate within society about what is our collective interest in transformation and in bringing about greater equity. So those are the two big shifts that we see.
Thank you for that, Prof. Hall. Mpho, do you want to add anything just in particular on the very basics around what this Act changes?
Thanks, Cathy. And I think those basics have been largely covered by both Benedict and Prof. Hall. I think I just want to reiterate maybe Prof. Hall's statements around the effect of this Act actually bringing us in line with what is stated in the Constitution. And specifically, if we were to look at, I guess, the most contentious part of this Act being the compensation aspect, I think this now will introduce an opportunity for us to actually start weighing what just and equitable means when the state is now having to balance public interest or public purpose against the rights and interests of those who would be affected, as well as potential beneficiaries and the like. So this potentially is a litmus test for the state to see how committed we are in terms of the purposes of public interest being the commitment to land reform, but also starting to open up the conversation of equitable access to state resources, noting that this Act isn't only limited to land, as is the same thing in the Constitution, where property as well, in its definition, is not limited to land.
The South African Constitution, and in particular Section 5, deals with matters around property, and the rights of individuals to property, right? And what are the circumstances and scenarios under which government can act? So when we look at, again, this particular act, how does it impact, or what is its effect on what the Constitution says about private property rights? Because part of what we are seeing is a view that says that this act is an attack on private property rights in this country. But what does it actually do and say that changes, if anything at all, how property rights in this country have been governed? Benedict?
Yeah, Cathy, and I think, in the same light that everybody has the right to property, as Prof. Hall and Employer indicated, we do have Section 25, which says that property may be expropriated in terms of a law of general application. And this is now the law of general application. And then, obviously, then the other safeguards were it must be for a public interest or in the public purpose. The compensation must be agreed at the time and the manner of payment, or if not agreed, then determined by a court. And then the amount, so the Section 25 sets out the safeguards within which then expropriation may encroach into a private owner's property rights. And what this act has done is just effectively given flesh to Section 25. It starts from that premise, and then it basically puts into place the administrative process within which Section 25 will be given life to. So, the government can't just, or the Minister of Public Works can't just decide one day to expropriate. He has to give a notice of intention to expropriate, which has to have a certain amount of detail with respect to how the value for the compensation was attained, what is the purpose of the expropriation, the reasons behind it, whether the actual state organ has actually requested the expropriation, etc. And then there's a process for the private owner to engage with that process, and to the extent that there's then a disagreement, the courts can then basically finally be the arbiters of whether that expropriation should proceed or not. So insofar as any concerns that there might be that this is unconstitutional, I don't see them, because the safeguards are there for a private property owner who potentially faces expropriation of his or her property.
This aspect of nil compensation, Professor Hall, has been one of the areas, of course, that has drawn quite a lot of scrutiny, right? It's also created part of the controversy around it. When we look at the reasons that would fall under what is just and what is equitable for the state to pay nil compensation, the clarity, is there clarity around that, and does it make clear sort of what then the state could use as justifiable and equitable reasons?
Okay, so Cathy, you're right to say that it's not just the power to expropriate, but the question of how is compensation to be approached? Who should be compensated? Who should not? Under what circumstances? That is actually very much at the center of the dispute. And there is a section within this Act that, of course, has been developed through a lot of contestation, through all the parliamentary processes. And, of course, the debates at the time were unfolding about whether or not the property clause in the Constitution should change. It has not. But what now is contained in this Act is a very clear statement in Section 12 that says the amount of compensation must be just and equitable. And what it does is it exactly repeats those sections of the property clause in the Constitution that says property that's expropriated must be paid compensation that is just and equitable. As Nicole correctly says, this is now an opportunity for the courts, for the government, for society as a whole to get now into this terrain about when is it just and when is it equitable to pay full compensation and when not. There is a difference between a family that has bought a property last year and now is going to be expropriated, either for land reform or for public interest or for public purpose, versus perhaps a company that acquired the land very cheaply under apartheid, it then benefited from subsidies in the past. It's now just holding onto the land, nothing is being done with it, it's just using it speculatively. I would imagine those two scenarios would attract very different levels of compensation. And that is precisely what is now provided for. And what it lists in this Act, the 5 criteria that are in the Constitution of what should be considered when we consider what is fair. Because we have to strike a balance between the interests of the people directly concerned and the public interest of people, and we've heard it very much in public debates about this issue. Many South Africans, particularly black South Africans, say, why should we now, our tax money be paid to buy out white landowners who benefited from apartheid? Why should that be done? Is that fair on us, let alone those individuals? So this is exactly why it's so contentious. But the 5 criteria, I think, are quite a compelling combination. It's like the current use of the property. Is it being used? The history of how it was acquired and used. Under what circumstances? What is the current market value is one of those criteria. How much has the state in the past contributed to the appreciation of value? If the state gave you an irrigation scheme, if the state gave you a lot of infrastructure, then that is actually already state investment. And finally, what's the purpose of the expropriation? So the question about how these are going to be interpreted in practice is unclear. But what is clear is that there may be certain categories in which it is not fair or equitable for the state to pay anything. And that is likely to be a very small subset. So right now, we're not even in the terrain of the state expropriating, let alone paying below market price. So I think that, nothing dramatic is going to happen now, but in the long run, the debate about compensation will be important. The last thing I think is important to bear in mind here is that at present, we don't have a state capable of performing the enormous number of administrative tasks that this Act requires. So, I think that for many people, the worry is not that there's about to be a massive land grab by the state, rather that the state will have these powers and, again, sit on them like it has been sitting on these constitutional powers for 30 years without using them.
We're going to continue the conversation shortly. It's 11:30, your headlines.
Thanks, Cathy. Good morning. I'm Kulufelo, therefore with the headlines. Lawyers representing listeriosis claimants and food producer Tiger Brands reach an agreement which will see some claimants in the ongoing class action receive advance payments. President Cyril Ramaphosa has responded to his U.S. counterpart, President Donald Trump, after Trump accused South Africa of confiscating land from certain people. And Gauteng Education MEC Matume Chilwane react to the tragic death of a grade 12 learner from Krugersdorp High School, west of Johannesburg. Details at 12.
This is Tulasizwe Simelane on the Morning Brief.
When will you put an end to this? Doctors not getting employment after they've done all the training, we've invested all the money in them, and they've done the community service.
Well, Tulasizwe, there is absolutely nothing I can do without the National Treasury. In other words, it's a budgetary issue without the budget. And as you know, there have been budget cuts and austerity measures. I've already met with the Treasury 2 times on this issue. On our own in health, there is absolutely nothing we can do without that amount of money to us. We need the funds, unfortunately.
That's Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, the health minister, talking to me here on the Morning Brief.
Tulasizwe Simelane on SAFM. Missed it? Find the podcast at safm.co.za. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're listening to The Talking Point. We're looking at the Expropriation Act that was recently signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa, and we're unpacking what exactly this act will mean. So what does it effectively change when it comes to how expropriation is effected in the country, and also, of course, the very hot issue of nil compensation that this particular act speaks to. Our guests for this morning, Benedict Phiri, Managing Director of Issue Prudentia Specialist Council, Professor Ruth Hall, Acting Director of PLAS, and DSI NRF South African Research Chair in Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, and Mpho Raboyane, who is Executive Director at Ndufunu Gwazi. Mpho, let me give you a chance to come in before we continue then to other aspects of this conversation.
Thanks, Cathy. So I think just with respect to what makes this act different in terms of the status quo, I think I'd want to echo Prof. Hall here to say that this is essentially bringing to life what the Constitution had provided for, specifically with respect to the compensation aspect. So looking at a just and equitable compensation will now clearly enable, should the dispute be brought to court, the court to finally decide, how much of these factors should weigh into a situation where you could potentially receive no compensation. And I think it must be noted that such a decision has been arrived at in the past. If you look at specific judgments coming from the Land Claims Court, subsequently overturned. But this is putting in effect what the Constitution had imagined in terms of using something as powerful as the property clause to effect its obligation around redress, the redress that the Constitution is committed to bringing about given the wrongs of apartheid. But I think I also want to shine a light here on the powers that have been given to the expropriating authority as well, just given that the current Minister of Public Works has come out publicly, saying that he does not intend to effect any expropriation on private property specifically. And that for us raises a concern around, the potential frustration of the potential of this act. I think others have said this before, that these powers aren't new and that the state has been effectively sitting on potential mechanism to start bringing about proper land reform and even a form of redistribution, which is what Section 25 of the Property Act also speaks to. I think we shouldn't perhaps make the mistake of concentrating solely on the private property protection aspect of the Section 25 in the Constitution, because even in that section there is a balance between the protection of private property but also the duties and the obligations owed by private persons to the well-being of the state. So I think in that light and in that principle, there must be some scrutiny around the reluctance of the expropriating authority under the Act to actually bring about the level of change needed in terms of land holdings in South Africa.
All right. Thanks for that, Mpho. And that is certainly, an aspect that I want us to get to before the conversation ends, right? Because, of course, there are regulations that are going to be published as a result of this Act. We haven't seen any of those yet. But those would also have to be coming out of the Public Works Department, which, as has been mentioned, you have a DA minister there who opposes the Act at a very basic level. So what does that mean then for the clarity that would be coming out of that legislation as well? Benedict, I want you to deal with the issue of process, because that's also another important aspect of this Act, that it outlines part of the process that would need to be followed where expropriation is concerned. So speak to me about what it says.
Yes, so, the process around the expropriation starts from Chapter 3 of the Act, and there the expropriating authority is then given the ability to investigate and gather information relating to the property for the purposes of expropriation. Now, this relates to information relating to the suitability of the property, whether there are any rights around the property and any factors that are relevant in determining the amount which may be just and equitable from a compensation perspective. And obviously there'll be a number of, professionals involved with that, including in respect if the property is land, the expropriating authority then is given powers to basically survey the land and ensure that they can get the requisite information that would then go into the next step of the process, which would then be a notice of intention to expropriate the property itself. Now, that would then be a notice that the expropriating authority then gives to the landowner, any holders of mortgages, or any other people who have rights in respect of the property, and that would kickstart then an engagement process between those stakeholders to then arrive at this just and equitable sort of compensation and any other factors, including dealing with any objections that may then be raised at that particular point in time. Once that is then done, we would then go on to a notice of expropriation, in respect of which then it would put into place the actual expropriation itself. It is important to basically highlight that this is an administrative process, right? So at every step of the way, the expropriating authority has to stick within the parameters of the law and ensure that they follow a procedurally and administrative fair process with respect within the boundaries of the Expropriation Act. So that would really be sort of the practical process in a nutshell. And to the extent that there wouldn't then be agreement on the compensation, it would then be fixed by a court, and the court would then also fix when the compensation would be payable and when the rights to the state may actually then flow. So that would be the process, Cathy, in sort of like a basics based on the Act as it stands.
So, Prof, the administrative process in and of itself then ensures that if I am the party, using myself here, Cathy as the example, that I don't wake up one morning and the land I'm on, there's suddenly a notice that says we're taking it by end of the day and you're not getting anything. It really prevents and prohibits such a scenario.
Yes, definitely. So, in fact, if anyone is really concerned about this, it's worth looking at the law. It's incredibly detailed, and in fact, many people who would like to see expropriation more widely used are very concerned that the state will not be able to use it. And this is because it actually has a very large number of administrative steps, notices, a period of time during which there can be public comment, concerns, objections, everybody else who might be affected has to be consulted. So there are a number of periods of time. So, the minimum timeline looks between six months to a year, in which there are multiple moments where objections can be raised. There are 7 main steps that are set out in the law, and so each of these requires an organ of state to give notices, or landowners, perhaps others who might be affected, farm workers, others who have any kind of right or use of the property involved, to make objections or to lodge their interests. So nothing very rapid happens under this law. And secondly, it has to be decided or approved by a court. So that is, again, consistent with the constitutional requirement. So Benedict rightly says that this is an administrative process, but all administrative processes are subject to requirements of administrative justice, which is reviewable by courts. In this case, the prime expropriating authority is the Minister of Public Works, but those powers can be delegated. And when it comes to land reform, for instance, dealing with land claims, those powers can be delegated to the minister. And in those cases where there are disputes over the expropriation or the compensation, it is in fact now the land court, a newly revived land court with full-time judges, and with some mediation and arbitration capacity that will oversee and review cases where there are disputes either on the expropriation itself or on the compensation. So I think that there are many of these processes. We are now probably in a moment where we have the Constitution, we have the legislation, but we may not have the political will and the bureaucratic muscle to actually see through such expropriations. I think that actually politically what's important now is for the President, for the Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform to identify a small number of test cases. And it inevitably is going to be the case that these will be contested in the courts. The Act itself is likely to be contested. It's been very clear that the DA, the Institute for Race Relations, AfriForum, many others are mobilizing to challenge the Act itself. But also, there needs to be some jurisprudence around this. And I think that it's in everybody's interests that we actually have some clarity about what is just and equitable. I wanted to mention one other thing, Cathy. I think that everyone woke up this morning and saw that Donald Trump has got concerned about this. And I think we really need to shine the light back to the United States, which itself also has this right of expropriation. The Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution also allows the state to expropriate, which it does often, but it also requires just compensation. So in fact, our constitutional framework is not that different. The difference we have is just and equitable compensation. Their wording is just. So I think that it's very important to not frame the South African case as if we're doing something that is unheard of in international law. We're trying to deal with historical injustice through a law-bound process.
Benedict, then I think as I'm watching the time, to wrap us up, when we look at the future and what then is likely to happen next, are we going to see the court challenges against the Act take course before we even get to a point of regulations by the department being promulgated? Or are we going to see sort of these processes that unfold simultaneously?
Yeah, I would certainly think for those that are potentially mobilizing against, the act as a whole, such as the DA and the IRR. Personally, I would think that it would be prudent to wait for the regulations, because certainly on the reading of the act, any issues that may seem to be in the act, from my perspective, don't arise to the level of constitutionality. I don't think you have an act that violates Section 25 of the Constitution. I think it gives full effect to Section 25, and I don't think you have an act that violates any other of the overarching values or principles of the Constitution. So I think it will suffice for constitutional muster. And from my perspective, I would want to see the DA and the IR waiting for the regulations before leveling any attacks on this. And that might even give the government an ability to find, as Prof. Hall has mentioned, one or two test cases in which we can start having jurisprudence around what is just and equitable. And the objects of this legislation, I think it's important that the objects of the legislation are kept in mind, and that is basically to transform property relations in this country.
Prof. Hall, your parting shot?
I think that, Cathy, this is an important tool. But, expropriation is just like a stick that might be used, it might not be used, and it's difficult to use. But up to now, I think that what we've seen is that there's been no political push to do so. What I think is necessary now is for the conversation not to only be about the powers of the state and the rights of private owners of property. Actually, what's been missing in this discourse and this whole discussion is, for whom is this property to be expropriated, and who should get what property and why? So I think that the other counterpart conversation is about dealing with the vast majority of South Africans who don't have clear, secure legal rights to a place where they can live, a place where they can have their families, a place where they can run a small business or a farm, a place where they can build a livelihood. So the majority of South Africans do not have private property. And I think that the debate about the rights of citizens to claim a right to land from the state is the next phase. And that is exactly what has been also neglected in our Constitution? How do people who perhaps don't have a historical claim to a particular piece of land, but nonetheless need land, they're out on the outskirts of the city, they've been evicted from a farm, they need a place. How can we create greater land justice? And I think that opening up that conversation will really democratize this, beyond it being only a tit-for-tat between those who have vested interests in unequal property relations and the state.
Sure. Professor Hall, thank you so much for your contribution. And the question you asked there is critical, right? How can we be providing land justice and ensuring that there is greater access for those who need it most? And is this the tool then that does that? So there you have it then, an unpacking of the Expropriation Act of 2024, Act number 13 of 2024. I hope that that has helped in terms of providing insight, in terms of what exactly that act says and how then expropriation is likely to be effected. But as you can hear, we're still a long way given the fact that there's the threat of court challenges and we're waiting on the legislation. We're waiting for it to be officially promulgated so that we know what else is going to feed into how it's going to be run administratively. Well, that's where we leave it on the talking point for this morning. The show is back with you again tomorrow between 9 and midday. Have yourselves a wonderful afternoon. Stay tuned to SAFM for all of the latest current affairs and news updates. Up next is the book reading.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of the book These Things Really Do Happen to Me by Kaya Dlang, read by Lerato Mvelase.
Assuming the best continues. They insisted on going to Moloko. I really didn't want to go, or rather, my wallet didn't. But we soon drove out of our place in Xolisa's car. I didn't have a car. I hadn't even learned to drive yet. Allow me an aside here. When I eventually got my own place, I still couldn't drive and had no car. My friends were great enablers of this no-car existence. They always offered to pick me up for one thing or another. Now, dear reader, please prepare yourself for the most name-droppingest paragraph in all of South Africa today. I was staying in Douglasdale, and Sizwe Dlomo lived no more than a quick 100-meter walk from me. Xolisa Jeshana, Phophi Ntsongwana, Anele Mdoda all lived in fourways. They all had cars and were all my chauffeurs. Trevor Noah lived about 15 kilometers away, but Trevor loves driving, so he would often be the first one to say he would pick me up when I asked on BBM. For you kids, BBM stands for BlackBerry Messenger. A BlackBerry is an ancient communications device that took the world by storm. BBM is what predates WhatsApp. Ask your parents. One day when I was picked up by my cousin, Shomla Dandala, the security at my complex asked me, "Who are you and what do you do? You are always being picked up by these TV people. You must be somebody important." I laughed and told him that I'm actually a nobody. Now back to the Z4 people. We took 2 cars, and my acquaintance from Grahamstown joined us in Xolisa's car because it didn't make sense to have 3 people in that 2-seater car. As soon as we got out of the gate, the Z4 stopped dead in the middle of the road. Cars were hooting, but the Z4 driver did not give a single fornication. We stopped on the side of the road to figure out what had happened. It turned out she had dropped a lighter. When we were back to driving, the Z4 followed us. She would keep accelerating and would weave in the road. I was scared for my life, and I told Xolisa to slow down and let them lead the way because they were making me very nervous. After parking our cars underground, we made our long walk to the club. The 3 girls said we would be able to get in without paying because they knew some guy. But we got to the door at the club, and the door lady was stern-faced. "We've got stamps," one of the girls said, trying to walk past her. The door lady shouted at her, "You go in there without showing me that stamp, and I will let my bouncers show you your bum." Okay, that stopped everyone. They turned back and showed their completely non-existent stamps. "Get out of my line." the hostess shouted. Xolisa and I looked at each other in utter confusion. The girls then held a mini caucus as if to elect the chairperson of the ANC branch. Without any communication, they said something to the hostess and then, one by one, they walked in. Xolisa and I figured that the issue had been resolved, so we followed. She stopped us saying, "The lady said the guys are paying." My face assumed that emoji with the wide-eyed shocked expression. "Excuse me?" I said. "They said the guys are paying." Then, for dramatic effect, 60 rands each. This was painful. It was quarter to feminine time of the month and payday was coming very, very slowly. "Let's go home, chap. I can't believe they would do this," I said to Xolisa. "We're already here, chap. Let's go in and enjoy ourselves," he said as he paid his 60 and walked in. I was now stuck. Should I tell her that I never said I was going to pay for them and tell her to get them out of the club? Or should I pay for them with my money, which was hanging with desperate claws over a cliff? I pulled out my debit card and paid while clenching my butt cheeks in absolute anguish. There is a great opening line in the movie Sin City. "She shivers in the wind like the last leaf on a dying tree." That's what my money was doing. It was shivering like the last leaf on a dying tree. As I walked in, I said to Xolisa, "Chap, let's buy our drinks now so that by the time they get back from the bathroom, we have our drinks and they won't bother us." He got the first round of ciders. His money was also on its last legs. I was just thinking, wow, Joburg, wow. We drank our ciders pretty quickly because we were reeling from what had just happened. They hadn't come back from the bathroom by the time we had finished our first drink, so I immediately ordered 2 more on my debit card. The total was 56 rand. "Sorry, sir, you have to spend 100 or more on a debit for us to swipe," the barman said to me. "What? No way!" "It's the policy, sir. I can keep your card here by the bar and you order until you reach the minimum required amount." In those days, you could do that. "Fine," I said as I handed him my card. We took our drinks and continued our state of depression. When the girls returned, they stood near us and started dancing. I suddenly had a disease that made it impossible for me to see them. My eyes made like baleka mbete and said, "I don't recognize your dancing, comrades." They eventually recognized what was going on. We were not about to buy them drinks. I did not even want to talk to them. They moved away and started dancing by themselves. Later, I ran into Bulelwa, a girl I had met at the braai earlier that evening. We had hit it off. I stopped feeling so sorry for myself, and we all made a night of it. My ego had been bruised.